What if everything we think we know about ancient human history is wrong? What if entire civilizations didn't just disappear, but were erased in ways science still can't explain? Mainstream history tells us progress was slow, linear, and fragile. Yet scattered across the globe are ruins, artifacts, and anomalies that suggest something very different. Tonight, we begin an investigation into what really happened to the lost ancient human civilizations and why their story still refuses to stay buried. Pasted. According to mainstream archaeology, human civilization followed a simple, predictable path. Small bands of hunter-gatherers gradually learned to farm. Farming led to villages. Villages grew into cities. And eventually, complex societies emerged in places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica. Historians believe these early civilizations rose independently, driven by environmental opportunity and human ingenuity. Stone tools became bronze. Bronze became iron. Writing systems emerged. Governments formed. Religion organized society. And progress marched forward, step by step. When civilizations collapsed, the explanations seem equally straightforward. Climate change, drought, earthquakes, invasion, disease. According to conventional wisdom, societies like the Maya, the Akkadians, or the Indus Valley simply failed to adapt to changing conditions. Experts say there is no need to look deeper. Human history, they argue, is messy but explainable. No missing chapters. No forgotten golden ages. No advanced knowledge lost to time. Yet even within this official story, cracks begin to appear. Timelines don't always align. Technological leaps seem too sudden. And some ancient constructions appear far beyond what their supposed builders should have been capable of achieving. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges these anomalies, but often sidelines them as outliers. Uncomfortable data. Unanswered questions. Problems to be solved later. But is that really the whole story? Evidence point 1. Civilizations that appear too early. One of the most troubling mysteries in ancient history is timing. According to official timelines, complex civilization should not appear before roughly 6,000 years ago. And yet, evidence suggests organized societies existed far earlier. Archaeological sites around the world reveal massive stone structures, ritual centers, and city planning that predate known civilizations by thousands of years. These sites were not simple camps. They required coordination, skilled labor, and long-term planning. What's even more intriguing is that many of these early sites show no clear signs of gradual development. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record, fully formed, as if the knowledge to build them already existed. Conventional explanations fall short here. Mainstream archaeology often claims these structures were built by primitive societies experimenting for the first time. But the precision, scale, and symbolism suggest otherwise. Some researchers quietly admit that the sophistication doesn't match the timeline. And that raises a disturbing question. If these civilizations weren't the first, then who came before them? But that's not the strangest part. Evidence point 2: impossible engineering and precision. Across the ancient world, we find stonework that still challenges modern engineers. Massive blocks weighing dozens, sometimes hundreds of tons, cut with astonishing precision, fitted together so tightly that not even a blade can slide between them. In many cases, these stones were transported across vast distances, over mountains, across valleys, without the wheel, without iron tools, without modern machinery. According to mainstream explanations, ancient builders used simple tools, wooden sledges, and human muscle. Yet no one has been able to fully replicate these methods with the same level of accuracy. Even today, engineers struggle to explain how ancient civilizations achieved such results consistently. The margins of error are too small. The techniques too refined. What's even more intriguing is that later cultures often built cruder structures directly on top of these masterpieces, as if the knowledge to create them had already been lost. Historians are baffled by this regression. Civilizations are supposed to advance, not forget how to build. So how did ancient society know techniques that vanished entirely? And why do these feats appear all over the world? Evidence point 3: a global pattern that shouldn't exist. From South America to Southeast Asia, from Africa to the Mediterranean, ancient sites share striking similarities. Pyramidal structures, astronomical alignments, sacred geometry, flood myths carved into stone and preserved in oral traditions. According to conventional wisdom, these cultures developed independently, separated by oceans, separated by time, separated by technology. Yet the parallels are difficult to ignore. Star maps that mirror each other across continents, myths describing great floods, fiery destruction, and the fall of an earlier age. Stories of teachers who arrived after catastrophe to help rebuild civilization. Mainstream archaeology often dismisses these similarities as coincidence, or as the result of basic human psychology. But some patterns are simply too specific. What researchers found next challenges everything. Many of these cultures claim their knowledge was inherited, not invented, passed down from a previous era, an era that ended in disaster, which leads us to a far more unsettling possibility. Evidence point 4: signs of a global cataclysm. Geological evidence reveals that Earth has experienced sudden, violent events in the distant past. Massive floods, rapid climate shifts, unexplained layers of destruction. In ice cores, sediment layers, and fossil records, scientists find signs of abrupt change. Not slow evolution, but catastrophe. Some researchers point to evidence of cosmic impacts, others to rapid melting at the end of the last ice age. Entire landscapes reshaped in what appears to be a geological instant. If advanced or semi-advanced civilizations existed before these events, their destruction would leave little trace. Cities swallowed by rising seas, structures buried beneath sediment, knowledge lost with the survivors. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how many ancient myths describe this exact scenario. Not as metaphor, but as memory. Could it be that these stories are not symbolic at all? And if so, why does mainstream history resist this possibility so strongly? When we synthesize the evidence, a troubling picture begins to form. Advanced construction, early dates, global similarities, and signs of sudden destruction. Some alternative historians suggest that human civilization may be far older than officially accepted, that we are not the first advanced society to walk this planet, but the latest. What if earlier civilizations rose, thrived, and collapsed long before recorded history? What if their knowledge survived only in fragments, encoded in myth, architecture, and tradition? Mainstream scholars push back against this idea. They argue there is no definitive proof, no written records, no continuous timeline. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Especially when oceans have risen, continents have shifted, and time itself has erased so much. Is it possible that what authorities don't want examined is not a single secret, but a complete rewriting of human history? Tonight, we've only begun to scratch the surface. We've explored anomalies that don't fit the official narrative, timelines that feel compressed, technologies that seem out of place. There are multiple possibilities. Perhaps these mysteries will eventually be explained by new discoveries. Or perhaps they point to something far older, far deeper, and far more unsettling. The truth remains elusive. Questions outnumber answers, and the evidence refuses to stay silent. If entire civilizations were lost before history began, then everything we think we know about ourselves must be reconsidered. So the question remains: what actually happened to the lost ancient human civilizations? What do you think? Let us know in the comments and decide for yourself. The age before history. If entire civilizations existed before recorded history, then the most important question isn't who they were. It's when they lived. Because once we challenge the timeline, everything else begins to unravel. What if human civilization is not thousands of years old, but tens of thousands? And what if the real story of humanity begins long before history books say it does? According to conventional archaeology, modern humans emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. But for most of that time, we're told they lived simple lives. Small nomadic groups, stone tools, no cities, no advanced knowledge. Mainstream history insists that civilization only began after the last ice age, around 9,000 to 10,000 BCE. This is when agriculture supposedly sparked permanent settlements. Only then, experts say, could complex societies exist? Before that, the world was too harsh, the climate too unstable, human cognition too undeveloped. This timeline has become foundational. It shapes textbooks, museums, and academic careers. And for decades, it went largely unchallenged. But recent discoveries have forced historians to quietly revise parts of this story. Sites once thought impossible are now accepted as real, though still inconvenient. Yet instead of rewriting the timeline, mainstream archaeology often stretches explanations to fit it. Exceptional sites are labeled anomalies, outliers, one-offs. But when anomalies keep appearing, they stop being anomalies. They become evidence. And that's where the real mystery begins. Evidence point 1: monumental construction before agriculture. One of the most unsettling discoveries in archaeology is that large-scale monumental architecture appears before agriculture. This directly contradicts the idea that farming was required for civilization. Excavated sites show massive stone pillars, complex layouts, and symbolic carvings dating back more than 11,000 years. These structures were built by people officially classified as hunter-gatherers. According to conventional wisdom, hunter-gatherers lack the organization needed for such projects. They move constantly. They don't stockpile resources. They don't coordinate labor at scale. And yet these ancient builders clearly did. The construction required planning across generations. It required shared belief systems. And it required specialized knowledge. What's even more intriguing is that after these monumental sites were completed, they were deliberately buried. Not abandoned, not destroyed, carefully sealed beneath tons of earth. Why would a primitive society go to such lengths to preserve something for the future? And why did this level of complexity appear so early, only to vanish again? Evidence point 2: a sudden explosion of knowledge. Another major problem with the official timeline is how quickly advanced knowledge appears. In multiple regions, civilizations seem to emerge almost overnight. Writing systems, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, mythology. There is little evidence of slow experimentation. Instead, we see fully developed systems arriving suddenly in the historical record. According to historians, this knowledge evolved rapidly due to social pressures. But the rate of development is difficult to justify. In some cases, early texts reference even older sources. Lost libraries, ancient teachers, sacred knowledge passed down from a forgotten age. What's even more intriguing is that many cultures describe themselves not as inventors, but as inheritors. They claim their civilization is a rebuilding effort. Rebuilding after what? And who possessed this knowledge first? Evidence point 3: the missing middle. Perhaps the most troubling gap in human history is what researchers call the missing middle. There is a strange discontinuity between early human capability and later civilization. Modern humans possess the same brain size and anatomy tens of thousands of years ago. Cognitively, we were already capable. And yet, according to the timeline, we waited tens of thousands of years to build anything complex. This makes little sense. Human innovation is opportunistic. When conditions allow, progress accelerates. It doesn't pause for millennia without reason. Some archaeologists suggest that earlier civilizations existed, but were erased by time. Sea level rise alone submerged vast coastal regions where early societies would logically have flourished. Entire landscapes are now underwater, unexplored, unexcavated. If advanced societies lived along ancient coastlines, their remains may still be buried beneath the ocean. And that leads to a disturbing realization. What we call prehistory may not be primitive at all. It may simply be hidden. Evidence point 4. Ancient calendars that reach too far back. Across the ancient world, we find calendars that measure time on enormous scales. Not decades, not centuries, but cosmic cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. These calendars track precession, stellar movements, and planetary alignments with remarkable accuracy. Knowledge that requires long-term observation, far longer than a single lifetime. According to mainstream explanations, this knowledge accumulated gradually. But some calendars appear fully formed at their first appearance. They don't begin at zero. They reference a starting point far in the past. Why would early civilizations create systems that stretch back into deep time? Unless they were remembering something. What researchers found next is even more compelling. Some of these calendars appear to reset after catastrophic events, as if time itself had been interrupted. A civilization-ending event. Evidence point 5. Cultural memory of an earlier world. Nearly every ancient culture speaks of an age before the current one. A golden age. An age of the gods. An age that ended in disaster. These stories are often dismissed as myth. Symbolic tales meant to teach moral lessons. But when myths across the globe describe the same sequence, advanced beings, great knowledge, sudden destruction, survivors rebuilding, it raises questions. Oral traditions are remarkably durable. They preserve information long after physical evidence is lost. What if these stories are distorted memories of real events? Not allegory, but history filtered through time. And if that's the case, then the official timeline is missing far more than a few centuries. It may be missing entire worlds. When we place these pieces together, the implications become unavoidable. Advanced construction before agriculture. Sudden knowledge with no developmental trail. Cognitive readiness without cultural expression. Calendars reaching into deep time. Global memories of catastrophe. Some researchers believe human civilization may have risen and fallen multiple times, each cycle erased by environmental collapse or cosmic disaster. Mainstream academia resists this idea. It threatens the foundation of modern historical understanding. But unanswered questions remain. Why do timelines feel compressed? Why does knowledge appear suddenly? Why do ancient cultures insist they are not the first? What if history isn't a straight line, but a repeating pattern? In this chapter, we challenged one of history's most sacred assumptions: that civilization is young. The evidence suggests something far more complex: a past layered with forgotten ages, civilizations buried beneath catastrophe and time. Whether these cultures were advanced, semi-advanced, or simply organized in ways we don't yet understand, one truth is clear: the official timeline doesn't tell the whole story. And as we'll see next, there may be physical remnants of these lost worlds hiding in places we've barely begun to explore. Beneath the earth, beneath the sea, and beneath history itself. The world that vanished beneath the seas. If early civilizations were erased, then we must ask a dangerous question. Where would their remains be hiding? Not in deserts, not on mountain tops, but beneath the oceans, where history rarely looks. Because the greatest archaeological cover-up may not be intentional at all. It may simply be submerged. According to mainstream archaeology, the oceans hold little relevance to early human civilization. Experts argue that humans only developed complex societies after sea levels stabilized. Before that, coastlines shifted too frequently. Settlements would have been temporary, insignificant. Conventional wisdom tells us that underwater ruins are either natural formations or much younger than claimed. Rock formations mistaken for walls. Erosion mistaken for architecture. Most funding and research focuses on land-based sites. Dry ground, easier excavation, clear stratigraphy. Underwater archaeology, by contrast, is expensive, technically difficult, and often dismissed before investigations even begin. Yet this assumption rests on a fragile premise: that ancient humans avoided coastlines. But everything we know about human behavior suggests the opposite. Coastlines provide food, transportation, stable climate, and access to trade. If early civilizations existed, the most logical place for them to thrive would be along ancient shores. Shorelines that no longer exist. And that's where the official story begins to collapse. Evidence point 1: the lost coastlines of the Ice Age. At the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose dramatically. Not by a few meters, but by more than 120 meters. Entire continental shelves disappeared beneath the waves. Land once exposed for tens of thousands of years vanished in a geological blink. This wasn't gradual for human timescales. In some periods, sea levels rose several meters per century. Any settlements along these coasts would have been swallowed, their ruins buried beneath layers of sediment, preserved, hidden. What's even more intriguing is that the timeline of this flooding aligns with the sudden appearance of post-ice age civilizations inland. Could survivors have retreated from drowning coastlines to higher ground? And if so, what knowledge did they bring with them? Evidence point to underwater structures that shouldn't exist. Across the world, divers and sonar scans have revealed geometric formations beneath the sea. Straight lines, right angles, terraced platforms. Mainstream explanations usually default to natural processes. Rock fracturing, erosion, coincidence. But some structures defy these explanations. They are too symmetrical, too ordered. Stone blocks stacked in patterns, stair-like formations descending into the deep, features resembling roads, walls, and foundations. In many cases, these formations are located far below current sea levels, implying they were built when the ocean was much lower. According to official timelines, humans weren't capable of such construction at that time. So either the structures aren't human-made, or the timeline is wrong. And that's a possibility few institutions are willing to entertain. Evidence point 3. Ancient maps that show a different world. Some of the most controversial evidence comes not from ruins, but from maps. Ancient maps exist that depict coastlines without ice and land masses now submerged. These maps display geographic accuracy that should not have been possible at the time they were created. Mainstream historians claim these maps are composites. Guesswork, later interpretations. But detailed analysis shows consistent scaling, latitude accuracy, and cartographic knowledge that implies advanced surveying. What's even more unsettling is that some of these maps appear to preserve information from a time before rising seas erased entire regions. How could ancient mapmakers record lands they supposedly never saw? Unless they were copying something far older. Maps, like myths, may be inherited knowledge. And that suggests memory of a world that no longer exists. Evidence point 4. Flood myths as geological records. Flood myths are often dismissed as symbolic, but their consistency is striking. Across continents and cultures, stories describe rising waters, failing skies, and the destruction of an earlier age. These are not vague allegories. They include specific details. Darkened suns, falling fire, walls of water. Survivors warned in advance. Modern geology confirms that sudden flooding events occurred at the end of the Ice Age. Glacial lakes collapsed. Ocean currents shifted. And sea levels surged. Some flooding events would have been catastrophic beyond imagination. If coastal civilizations existed, these events would have destroyed them almost entirely. The survivors would remember. They would warn future generations. And over time, history would become myth. But myths don't appear randomly. They persist because they encode truth, which raises an unsettling question. Are flood myths not stories about gods, but eyewitness accounts? Evidence Point 5. The silence of official research. Perhaps most disturbing of all is not what we've found, but what we haven't looked for. Less than a tiny fraction of the ocean floor has been systematically explored. Even less has been studied for archaeological remains. Funding is scarce. Interest is limited. And discoveries that challenge established narratives face intense scrutiny. Researchers who push too far are often marginalized. Their work labeled speculative. Their funding cut. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. No research means no evidence. No evidence means no revision of history. But absence of investigation is not proof of absence. It is a blind spot. And history is full of blind spots that later generations regret ignoring. When we connect these threads, a powerful possibility emerges. An ancient world once thrived along coastline, now lost to the sea. Its cities drowned. Its technologies buried. Its survivors scattered inland. Some alternative historians believe this submerged world may explain the sudden rise of later civilizations. The knowledge didn't originate inland. It arrived there. Mainstream academia resists this interpretation. It demands extraordinary evidence. But the questions remain. Why do myths describe flooding with such precision? Why do ancient maps depict submerged lands? Why does the archaeological record feel incomplete? What if the ocean isn't empty, but full of history we've chosen not to see? In this chapter, we looked beneath the waves, and what we found was not clarity, but possibility. Lost coastlines, submerged structures, maps from a vanished world, memories encoded as myth. If ancient civilizations existed before the seas rose, their story would be the greatest loss in human history. And yet, the ocean may still be guarding their secrets. As we move forward, we'll turn our attention to the physical evidence left behind by survivors. Massive stone monuments that seem to appear out of nowhere. Structures that may not be beginnings, but echoes of something far older. Stone giants that shouldn't exist. If survivors of a lost world carried knowledge inland, they left behind something more durable than stories. They left stone. Massive, precise, enduring. Because when we step away from the coastlines and look toward the heartlands of ancient civilizations, we encounter monuments so colossal that they raise an uncomfortable question. Who really built them? According to mainstream archaeology, ancient monuments were built gradually by early civilizations using simple tools and enormous human labor. Stone by stone, generation by generation. Historians argue that these structures represent the pinnacle of early engineering, the result of trial and error, cultural evolution, religious motivation. No lost knowledge required. The official explanation insists that copper tools, stone hammers, ropes, sledges, and manpower were sufficient. That organization, not technology, was the key. And yet, even within this framework, experts admit something unusual. Many ancient monuments appear suddenly, fully developed, with no clear architectural ancestors. There is often no experimental phase, no crude prototypes, just mastery. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges this, but often attributes it to missing evidence or coincidence. Yet when the same pattern repeats across continents, coincidence becomes harder to defend. And that's when the stones begin to speak. Evidence point 1: stones beyond human limits. Across the ancient world, we find stones weighing tens to hundreds of tons. Quarried, transported, lifted, and placed with astonishing accuracy. Some blocks are larger than modern construction cranes routinely handle. And yet they were moved without wheels, steel, or engines. Conventional explanations rely heavily on hypothetical methods. Wooden sledges, lubricated tracks, thousands of workers pulling in unison. But no definitive proof exists that these techniques were used at the required scale. And experimental archaeology struggles to reproduce the results. What's even more troubling is that these massive stones are often placed with greater precision than smaller ones. Perfect alignment, tight joints, structural stability that has endured earthquakes for millennia. This defies intuition. If early builders were experimenting, we would expect mistakes, misalignments, structural failures. Instead, we find perfection. So how did ancient builders achieve this level of mastery without first failing? And why does this knowledge seem to vanish afterward? Evidence point 2: precision that rivals modern engineering. Many ancient stone blocks are cut with astonishing flatness and symmetry. Surfaces align to within fractions of a millimeter. Angles repeat with mathematical consistency. This level of precision typically requires advanced measuring tools, stable reference points, and a deep understanding of geometry. According to mainstream views, ancient builders used string, plumb bobs, and sightlines. But these methods struggle to explain uniform precision across massive structures. Even more intriguing is that some stonework appears machine-like. Smooth curves, consistent depths, marks that resemble modern cutting techniques. Historians insist these impressions are the result of hand tools and abrasion. But experimental attempts to recreate them often fall short. What researchers found next challenges everything. Later cultures frequently reused these structures, but could not replicate them. Their additions are visibly cruder, less precise, less ambitious. It's as if they inherited monuments they did not fully understand, which raises a dangerous possibility. Were these civilizations builders or caretakers? Evidence point 3: global similarities in stone architecture. From one continent to another, ancient stone structures share striking design principles. Polygonal masonry, interlocking stones, earthquake-resistant layouts. These techniques appear in regions with no official contact, separated by oceans, separated by time. According to conventional explanations, these similarities emerged independently. Different cultures solving the same engineering problems. But the consistency is difficult to ignore, not just in concept, but in execution. The same stone-cutting styles, the same construction logic, the same emphasis on durability. What's even more intriguing is that these methods often disappear from later construction traditions. Civilization supposedly advanced, yet forgot how to build their strongest structures. That inversion is deeply unsettling. Progress doesn't usually work backward, unless something interrupted it. Evidence point 4. Monuments with no clear purpose. Many ancient stone structures defy easy explanation. They are not homes, not fortresses, not purely religious temples. Their scale exceeds practical needs. Their precision exceeds symbolic necessity. Some are aligned to astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, star risings. Others appear positioned to interact with the landscape in deliberate ways, acoustically, geometrically, or visually. Mainstream archaeology often labels these features ceremonial, symbolic, ritualistic. But symbolism does not require extreme engineering precision. And rituals do not require stones weighing hundreds of tons, which suggests these structures may have served functions we no longer understand. Functions that were important enough to justify immense effort. But important to whom? And why were they never built again? Evidence point 5. The silence between eras. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of ancient monuments is what comes after. There is often a long silence. Construction stops. Knowledge fades. Techniques vanish. Later cultures inherit the ruins and build around them, but not like them. They mythologize the builders, attribute the works to gods, giants, or legendary ancestors. This isn't arrogance. It's honesty. They knew they couldn't replicate what came before. And that admission is quietly recorded in stone and story. If these monuments were the pinnacle of early civilization, why didn't technology continue upward? Unless these structures belong to a chapter of history that ended abruptly. A chapter erased. When we step back and look at the pattern, it becomes hard to ignore. Sudden appearance of master-level construction. No developmental phase. Global consistency. And sudden disappearance of knowledge. Some alternative historians suggest these monuments are remnants of a pre-cataclysmic world. Built before disaster. Preserved because stone endures where everything else fails. Mainstream scholars argue this interpretation is speculative. They insist we underestimate ancient ingenuity. But the questions persist. Why does precision decline over time? Why are the oldest structures often the best? Why does the knowledge not accumulate, but vanish? What if these monuments are not beginnings, but endings? In this chapter, we followed the stone trail inland. And what it revealed was not progress, but inheritance. Colossal blocks that defy simple explanation. Precision beyond necessity. Global similarities without clear transmission. These structures stand like fingerprints of a lost age. An age whose builders may never be known by name, but whose work refuses to be ignored. And as we move forward, the mystery deepens. Because some of these monuments appear to encode knowledge, not just of the land, but of the sky. In the next chapter, we'll look upward, toward ancient alignments that suggest a forgotten understanding of time, cycles, and catastrophe. Knowledge written in the sky. If ancient monuments are not just stone, but messages, then we must ask a critical question. What were their builders trying to preserve? Not power, not territory, but knowledge. Because when we look closer at the world's oldest structures, we discover something extraordinary. They don't just face the land, they face the sky. According to mainstream archaeology, ancient peoples were deeply spiritual. They worshiped the sun, the moon, and the stars. Their monuments, historians say, reflect religious devotion rather than scientific understanding. Alignments to solstices and equinoxes are described as symbolic. Seasonal markers for agriculture. Ceremonial calendars. Experts argue that early civilization observed the heavens out of necessity. Tracking time. Predicting seasons. Organizing rituals. No advanced astronomy required. But this explanation only works until we examine the precision involved. Because some ancient structures align not just with the sun, but with distant stars, long-term cycles, and celestial events that unfold over tens of thousands of years. Knowledge that exceeds basic observation. Knowledge that demands something more. Evidence point 1. Alignments that defy chance. Across the ancient world, monuments are aligned with astonishing accuracy. Not just roughly oriented, but precisely calibrated. Some track the sun on specific days of the year. Others align with lunar standstills that occur only every 18.6 years. Still others point toward specific star risings that no longer occur today. These alignments are so exact that modern instruments confirm them within fractions of a degree. According to conventional explanations, ancient builders relied on naked-eye observation. Simple tools. Repetition over generations. But the consistency across sites separated by thousands of miles is troubling. How did cultures with no official contact encode the same celestial logic into stone? And why was such effort invested in accuracy far beyond practical necessity? The sky, it seems, was more than a calendar. It was a record. Evidence point 2. Knowledge of long-term celestial cycles. One of the most complex astronomical phenomena is precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that completes a full cycle roughly every 26,000 years. Detecting precession requires careful observation over many generations. Understanding it requires abstract thinking and long-term record keeping. And yet, ancient myths, monuments, and symbolic systems appear to reference this cycle repeatedly. Star positions encoded in stone do not match modern skies, but skies from thousands of years earlier. Mainstream archaeology argues this is coincidence or reinterpretation. But what researchers found next challenges everything. Some monuments appear intentionally misaligned for their time, but perfectly aligned for a much earlier epoch. Why would builders encode obsolete star positions? Unless they were preserving memory. Not prediction, but remembrance. Evidence point 3. Catastrophe markers in stone. Many ancient structures are aligned not only with celestial beauty, but with celestial danger. Comets, meteor showers, unusual stellar events. In myths across cultures, destruction comes from the sky. Fire, noise, darkness, floods. Mainstream historians label these stories symbolic. But astronomical records reveal that Earth periodically passes through debris fields capable of causing catastrophic impacts. Some ancient monuments appear oriented toward the radiant points of known meteor streams. Others mark date associated with catastrophic myths. Why would ancient societies track destructive events? Unless they had lived through one. Unless their sky knowledge was born of trauma. And unless these structures were warnings, not worship. Evidence point 4. Mathematics hidden in architecture. Beyond alignments, ancient monuments encode complex mathematics. Ratios, constants, geometric relationships. Some structures incorporate precise proportions that mirror natural constants. Others repeat harmonic ratios found in physics, acoustics, and astronomy. According to mainstream explanations, these are aesthetic choices. Symbolic numerology. But the recurrence of the same mathematical relationships across cultures suggests something deeper. These builders were not guessing. They were calculating. And mathematics does not emerge suddenly without precedent, which raises a profound question. Where did this knowledge come from? And why was it carved into stone instead of written on paper? Evidence point 5. Stone as a time capsule. Unlike written records, stone survives catastrophe. Fire can't burn it. Floods can't dissolve it. Time struggles to erase it. If a civilization knew disaster was coming, stone would be the logical medium to preserve knowledge. Not libraries, not scrolls, but monuments. Some researchers believe ancient structures were designed as memory devices, encoding astronomical cycles, historical warnings, temporal markers, messages not meant for their contemporaries, but for survivors, and perhaps for us. If this interpretation is correct, then ancient monuments are not primitive expressions of belief. They are archives, and we may still be learning how to read them. When we assemble the evidence, a startling possibility emerges. Ancient builders possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. They understood long-term cycles. They tracked celestial threads. Some alternative historians suggest this knowledge was inherited from a pre-cataclysmic civilization, one that learned the hard way how fragile civilization truly is. Mainstream academia resists this interpretation. It challenges the idea of linear progress. But the unanswered questions remain. Why encode deep-time astronomy? Why track catastrophic cycles? Why preserve knowledge in stone? What if these monuments were not expressions of faith, but acts of survival? In this chapter, we looked upward, and history looked back. The sky was not just observed. It was studied, measured, remembered. Ancient monuments may be more than relics. They may be messages across time, from a civilization that understood something we have forgotten. As we continue, the mystery grows darker, because not all knowledge was preserved openly. Some of it appears hidden, encoded, buried. In the next chapter, we'll examine what ancient builders may have concealed beneath their monuments, and why some chambers were never meant to be opened. The sealed chambers and forbidden spaces. If ancient monuments were designed to preserve knowledge, then the most important information would not be left exposed. It would be hidden, or protected, sealed away from time, disaster, and misuse. And that is exactly what we find when we look beneath the stone. Because across the ancient world, monuments are not solid masses. They are shells, built around chambers, corridors, shafts, and voids whose purpose remains unexplained. According to mainstream archaeology, internal chambers served simple functions: burial rooms, ritual spaces, structural weight distribution. Hidden corridors are often described as symbolic, spiritual journeys for the dead, metaphors for rebirth or ascension. Experts insist there is nothing mysterious about sealed chambers. They were closed to prevent looting, to stabilize structures, to mark sacred boundaries. In this view, hidden spaces are cultural expressions, not repositories of lost knowledge. But this explanation begins to fracture under scrutiny, because many sealed chambers contain nothing. No bodies, no offerings, no inscriptions, just emptiness. And emptiness, when deliberately engineered, is rarely meaningless. Evidence point 1: chambers that were never meant to be used. In numerous ancient monuments, internal chambers show no signs of human activity. No soot from torches, no wear from foot traffic, no evidence of repeated access. Some chambers were sealed immediately after construction. never opened, never revisited. This raises an uncomfortable question. Why build a room that no one enters? Conventional explanations struggle here. Symbolism alone cannot justify the extreme effort required to carve and seal these spaces. What's even more intriguing is that these chambers are often located at structurally significant points, centers of mass, geometric focal points, as if the chamber itself mattered more than what it contained. But what purpose could an empty space serve? And why hide it so carefully? Evidence point 2: precision shafts with no practical function. Some ancient structures contain narrow shafts that run for dozens of meters. Too small for people, too precise to be accidental. They angle upward or downward with remarkable accuracy, sometimes aligned to stars, sometimes terminating blindly within the stone. Mainstream archaeology often labels these shafts as ventilation, symbolic passages for the soul, architectural quirks. But many of them don't ventilate anything. They don't connect chambers. They don't improve airflow. Instead, they appear intentionally designed to point somewhere. What researchers found next is even more unsettling. Some shafts align with celestial events that occurred thousands of years ago, but not today. Why design a permanent structure to reference a moment in deep time? Unless that moment mattered. Unless it marked something catastrophic. Evidence point 3: chambers discovered and then ignored. Throughout modern history, explorers have discovered hidden chambers beneath ancient monuments. Some were mapped, some briefly documented, and then they vanished from discussion. In some cases, access was restricted. In others, findings were declared inconclusive. Mainstream narratives moved on. This pattern has repeated more than once. Initial excitement, a speculation, then silence. Official explanations cite safety concerns, a structural risk, preservation issues. But skeptics ask a different question. If there is nothing to hide, why stop looking? Why not exhaustively explore spaces that could redefine human history? Unless those spaces raise questions no one is prepared to answer. Evidence point 4: empty chambers as energy spaces. Some researchers propose that sealed chambers were not meant to store objects, but to manipulate environment. Acoustics, resonance, vibration. Certain chambers amplify sound in unusual ways. Low-frequency vibrations resonate through stone. Standing waves form. Mainstream archaeology tends to dismiss this as coincidence. But the consistency across sites is difficult to ignore. These chambers are often located where resonance would be strongest, at nodes of the structure's geometry. If ancient builders understood vibration and its effects on matter or consciousness, these chambers may have served purposes we no longer recognize. Not religious, not funerary, functional. And that suggests knowledge lost, not imagined. Evidence point 5. Sealing as a deliberate act of preservation. One detail appears again and again. These chambers were not destroyed. They were sealed. Carefully. Deliberately. Sealing preserves. It protects from decay, looters, and time. If ancient builders knew catastrophe was coming, sealing knowledge would make sense. Not to hide it forever, but to protect it until rediscovered. And that implies intent. Intent implies foresight. And foresight implies experience, which leads to a chilling possibility. These builders may have known what was coming, because it had already happened before. When we connect the evidence, a pattern emerges. Hidden chambers without use. Shafts aligned to ancient skies. Discoveries quietly sidelined. Spaces designed around vibration and geometry. Some alternative historians suggest ancient monuments functioned as vaults of knowledge, not for their time, but for the future. Mainstream scholars resist this interpretation. They argue it assigns modern concepts to ancient minds. But the questions remain. Why hide empty chambers? Why seal them so completely? Why design structures around unseen spaces? What if these chambers were not empty at all, but encoded in ways we don't yet understand? In this chapter, we went beneath the stone, and what we found was not clarity, but intention. Ancient builders did not merely construct monuments. They engineered absence. They shaped voids. They protected spaces that mattered. Whatever these chambers were meant to preserve, it was important enough to hide, important enough to seal, important enough to outlast civilizations. As we move forward, the mystery deepens further, because not all knowledge was hidden in stone. Some of it was passed down through people, through stories of teachers who arrived after catastrophe. In the next chapter, we'll examine those figures, the mysterious bringers of knowledge who appear again and again in ancient traditions, the survivors who rebuilt the world. If knowledge survived catastrophe, it didn't survive on its own. It had carriers, witnesses, survivors. Because across the ancient world, civilizations tell a remarkably similar story. Not of invention, but of inheritance. Not of beginnings, but of recovery. And at the center of these stories stand mysterious figures who arrive after disaster, bringing knowledge humanity is said to have lost. According to mainstream scholarship, these figures are mythological, symbolic representations of cultural values, personifications of agriculture, law, astronomy, or morality. Historians argue that early societies used legendary teachers to legitimize authority, to explain sudden social change, to unify people under shared beliefs. In this view, civilizing heroes are metaphors, not memories. Their supernatural traits exaggerations. Their stories poetic inventions. Mainstream explanations insist there is no reason to take these accounts literally. Yet even skeptics admit something unusual. These figures appear independently across cultures, separated by oceans, separated by time, and they share strikingly consistent characteristics. Consistency at this scale is difficult to dismiss. Evidence point 1. Teachers who arrive after catastrophe. Across ancient traditions, civilizing figures appear after great destruction. Floods, fires, the collapse of a previous age. They do not rule by force. They teach. They introduce agriculture, architecture, astronomy, writing, and law. They reorganize society. They restore order. What's even more intriguing is what they do not claim. They rarely say they invented this knowledge. Instead, they say they are restoring it. This detail appears again and again. Why would cultures independently invent the idea of forgotten knowledge? Unless something truly had been forgotten. Evidence point 2. Descriptions that do match the time. Descriptions of these teachers often include unusual details. They are said to come from across the sea, from the east, from the sky. They dress differently, speak differently, live apart from the population. Some are described as tall, others as light-skinned or bearded in regions where that was uncommon. Many refuse worship and insist they are not gods. Mainstream historians attribute these traits to symbolism or later embellishment. But what researchers found next complicates that view. These descriptions appear in the earliest versions of the stories, not later retellings. And they are remarkably consistent. Why would unrelated cultures imagine the same type of outsider? And why place them specifically after catastrophe? Evidence point 3. Knowledge too advanced for the era. The knowledge attributed to these figures often exceeds what mainstream timelines allow. They teach precise agriculture aligned with seasonal cycles. They introduce geometry, calendars, and star lore. They establish legal systems and ethical codes seemingly overnight. According to conventional archaeology, this knowledge should have taken centuries to develop. Instead, it arrives fully formed. Historians argue this is mythic compression. Long development simplified into stories. But compression does not explain accuracy. Some of this knowledge works. It is correct. It aligns with natural laws. That suggests real understanding, not symbolic storytelling. And understanding must come from experience. Evidence point 4. Disappearance without legacy. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how these figures leave. They do not establish dynasties. They do not claim descendants. They do not rule indefinitely. They teach, then vanish. Some depart across the sea. Others promise to return. Many are said to withdraw once humanity is stable again. Their disappearance leaves behind institutions, but not lineages. This makes little sense if these figures were inventions designed to legitimize power. Legends usually glorify rulers. They don't erase them, unless these figures were never meant to rule, unless they were caretakers, passing on knowledge before stepping aside. Evidence point 5, a pattern that refuses to go away. When these stories are compared globally, a pattern emerges. Catastrophe, survivors, teachers, rebuilding, different names, different symbols, same structure. Mainstream academia explains this as shared human psychology. Societies responding similarly to chaos. But psychology doesn't explain specificity. It doesn't explain technical knowledge. It doesn't explain timing. And it doesn't explain why these stories always point backward to a lost age, never forward. If civilization was just beginning, why anchor identity in something older? Unless the past held something greater than the present. When we connect these accounts to the evidence we've already explored, submerged worlds, advanced stonework, astronomical knowledge, sealed chambers, a provocative possibility emerges. Some alternative historians suggest these teachers were survivors of a pre-cataclysmic civilization. Not gods, not aliens, humans. Humans who retained fragments of lost knowledge and helped restart civilization. Mainstream scholars reject this interpretation. They argue it blurs myth and history. But unanswered questions remain. Why does the same story appear everywhere? Why is knowledge remembered as inherited? Why do these figures arrive only after disaster? What if these legends are not exaggerations, but degraded memories? In this chapter, we followed the human thread through catastrophe. Stories of teachers who arrive when civilization is broken. Figures who restore knowledge, then disappear. Legends that insist humanity is rebuilding, not inventing. If these accounts preserve fragments of real events, then history has a hidden backbone. One carried not by stone, but by people. And as we move forward, the mystery sharpens. Because if catastrophe erased civilizations once, it could happen again. In the next chapter, we'll examine the evidence for repeating global disasters and why ancient knowledge may have been preserved not for curiosity, but as a warning. The cycle of destruction. If civilization has been rebuilt before, then its destruction was not random. It followed a pattern, a rhythm written into the planet itself. Because when we examine the geological and historical record together, an unsettling idea begins to take shape. Human civilization may not be moving forward in a straight line. It may be caught in a cycle. According to mainstream science, Earth's history is shaped by gradual processes. Plate tectonics, climate shifts, evolution over immense spans of time. Catastrophic events, experts say, are rare. Exceptional. Outliers. Civilization-ending disasters are considered anomalies. One-off events unlikely to repeat on human timescales. This view is comforting. It suggests stability, predictability. Modern society is built on this assumption. But geology tells a different story, one not of smooth continuity, but of sudden interruption. And once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Evidence point 1: sudden global climate shifts. Earth's climate history is not a gentle curve. It is jagged. Ice core samples reveal abrupt temperature changes occurring in decades, not millennia. Entire ecosystems collapsed rapidly, then stabilized. These events were global, synchronous across continents. Mainstream explanations attribute them to natural variability. Ocean circulation changes, glacial dynamics, but the speed remains troubling. Human societies depend on climate stability. Agriculture collapses without it. Cities fail. If advanced civilizations existed during these abrupt shifts, they would not have survived intact. Which raises a critical question. How many times has climate reset human progress? Evidence point 2: evidence of sudden flooding. Geological records show repeated episodes of massive flooding. Not slow sea rise, but catastrophic inundation. Entire basins filled rapidly. River systems reversed. Coastlines vanished. Sediment layers indicate violent water movement, not seasonal flooding. These events correspond with the end of the last ice age. But similar patterns appear earlier as well. Mainstream science acknowledges these floods, but disconnects them from human history. Yet ancient myths describe exactly these events. Walls of water, land swallowed overnight, civilizations erased. Coincidence becomes harder to defend when geology and myth align. Unless myth preserves memory. Evidence point 3: fire from the sky. Beyond water and ice, Earth bears scars of fire. Impact craters, melted glass, magnetic anomalies. Evidence suggests that Earth has been struck repeatedly by cosmic debris. Asteroids, comets, fragments. Some impacts are well documented. Others are subtle. Airbursts that leave no crater but devastate regions. Modern science admits that such events are inevitable on long enough time scales. But ancient traditions speak of them as lived experiences. Stars falling, heavens burning, suns darkened. If these were real events, they would devastate civilizations, especially coastal and lowland societies, and they would leave survivors traumatized, determined to remember. Evidence point 4: cultural memory of repeating ages. Across ancient cultures, time is not linear. It is cyclical. Worlds rise, worlds fall, then begin again. These are not fringe ideas. They are central to ancient cosmologies. Mainstream scholars often label this symbolic, metaphorical. But cycles are a natural response to repeated experience. If societies repeatedly witnessed collapse, they would encode that pattern into worldview, not as fear, but as expectation. And that expectation may explain why ancient builders obsessed over timekeeping, astronomy, and preservation. They were not predicting catastrophe. They were anticipating it. Evidence point 5. Why knowledge was preserved. If catastrophe was inevitable, then preserving knowledge becomes an act of survival. Not to prevent disaster, but to recover after it. Stone monuments, astronomical records, sealed chambers, teaching myths. These are not random cultural expressions. They are continuity mechanisms, ways to restart civilization. Mainstream archaeology treats these elements separately. Architecture here, myth there, astronomy elsewhere. But when combined, they form a system designed not for prosperity, but for recovery. And that reframes everything. When we connect climate data, geological evidence, and ancient memory, a disturbing pattern emerges. Civilization appears vulnerable to forces far beyond human control. Climate shifts, floods, cosmic events. Some alternative historians believe humanity has reached high levels of organization multiple times, only to be reset by global disaster. Mainstream academia resists this framing. It challenges progress narratives. But the unanswered questions remain. Why do ancient cultures expect destruction? Why preserve knowledge so deliberately? Why build for eternity instead of utility? What if ancient people understood something we've forgotten? That civilization is temporary. In this chapter, we confronted a difficult possibility. That human history is not a steady ascent, but a repeating loop. Civilizations rise. They flourish. Then forces beyond their control bring collapse. If this has happened before, then the ruins, myths, and monuments we study are not relics of ignorance. They are warnings. And as we continue, the implications grow more uncomfortable. Because if ancient civilizations tried to warn the future, the question becomes unavoidable. Were they warning us? In the next chapter, we'll examine what ancient knowledge suggests about our own time and whether history may be closer to repeating itself than we think. The warning meant for us. If ancient civilizations rose and fell in cycles, then their greatest concern would not have been survival. It would have been memory. Because a catastrophe doesn't just destroy buildings. It erases knowledge. It resets identity. It forces humanity to begin again, unaware it has done so before. Unless someone leaves a warning. According to modern science, humanity now stands apart from the past. Technology has insulated us from nature. Satellites monitor the skies. Climate models predict change decades in advance. We no longer rely on myth or monument. We rely on data. Mainstream thinkers argue that ancient warnings are irrelevant to the modern world. We understand earthquakes. We track asteroids. We measure climate shifts. The idea that ancient societies could teach us something about global catastrophe is often dismissed as romantic speculation. But this confidence rests on a fragile assumption. That knowledge alone is enough. History suggests otherwise. Because knowing something is coming is not the same as being able to stop it. Evidence point 1. Ancient knowledge mirrors modern discoveries. One of the most unsettling developments of the modern era is how often new discoveries echo ancient ideas. Climate instability, cosmic impact risk, solar activity cycles, rapid environmental change. These are not new fears. They are ancient ones, now expressed in scientific language. Ancient myths describe skies that burn, seas that rise, and worlds that reset. Modern science confirms that such events are not hypothetical. They have happened before, and they will happen again. What's even more troubling is timing. Some ancient records suggest periodic destruction, not random but cyclical. And modern science increasingly acknowledges cycles in solar output, orbital dynamics, and cosmic debris patterns. The overlap is uncomfortable because it suggests ancient observers were not guessing. They were recording. Evidence point 2. The fragility of modern civilization. Modern civilization feels permanent. Cities of steel, digital memory, global infrastructure. But when examined closely, it is fragile. Supply chains depend on stability. Power grids depend on climate. Digital knowledge depends on electricity. A sufficiently large catastrophe, a massive flood, a solar storm, a cosmic impact could erase modern civilization faster than ancient ones. And unlike stone monuments, our knowledge is ephemeral. Hard drives decay. Servers fail. Digital records vanish without power. Ironically, the ancients may have preserved knowledge more durably than we have. They carved into stone. We store in clouds, which raises a disturbing possibility. Are we less prepared than they were? Evidence point 3. Why ancient warnings were symbolic. If ancient builders wanted to warn the future, why didn't they leave clear instructions? Why myths instead of manuals? Because warnings must survive catastrophe. Language changes. Cultures vanish. Symbols endure. Myth is not ignorance. It is compression. A way to encode memory so it survives disruption. Flood myths preserve the danger of water. Fire myths preserve the danger of the sky. Cycles preserve the expectation of repetition. Ancient warnings were not meant to be understood immediately. They were meant to endure until rediscovered, until humanity reached a point where it could finally understand them. That point may be now. Evidence point 4. Resistance to catastrophic thinking. One of the greatest barriers to understanding ancient warnings is psychological. Humans resist ideas that threaten stability. We prefer linear progress, endless growth. Mainstream institutions often downplay catastrophic risk, not out of malice, but necessity. Societies require confidence to function. But ancient cultures had already lived through collapse. They did not see catastrophe as failure. They saw it as reality. And they built their worldview accordingly. What modern society calls pessimism, ancient societies called preparedness, which raises an uncomfortable question. Have we mistaken confidence for safety? Evidence point 5. The silence between the lines. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of ancient warnings is what they do not say. They do not name dates. They do not specify mechanisms. They do not predict outcomes. Instead, they repeat a single message in countless forms. This has happened before. It will happen again. Remember. That message appears carved in stone, woven into myth, encoded in sky alignments, and passed through teaching figures. It is not fear-mongering. It is continuity. And continuity may be the only victory civilization ever achieves. When ancient warnings are viewed through a modern lens, their purpose becomes clearer. They were not trying to prevent catastrophe. They were trying to outlast it. Some alternative historians believe ancient civilizations accepted that global disaster was inevitable. Their goal was not permanence, but recovery. Mainstream scholars remain cautious. They argue this interpretation projects modern anxieties onto ancient minds. But the unanswered questions remain. Why preserve knowledge across millennia? Why emphasize cycles over progress? Why build monuments meant to endure catastrophe? What if ancient people understood something we still struggle to accept? That civilization is not permanent, but memory can be. In this chapter, the mystery turned toward us. Ancient civilizations may not have been warning their own time. They may have been warning ours. Their monuments endure. Their myths persist. Their message remains intact. Civilization rises. Civilization falls. Only knowledge determines how quickly it returns. And as we move forward, one final question looms. If ancient civilizations tried to preserve knowledge for the future, did we listen? In the next chapter, we'll confront the ultimate implication of this investigation and ask whether humanity is destined to repeat the same forgotten mistakes. Are we the next lost civilization? If ancient civilizations rose, fell, and tried to warn the future, then one final question can no longer be avoided. Where do we stand in the cycle? Not as observers of history, but as participants. Because every civilization that believed it was different, permanent, eventually discovered it was not. Modern society prides itself on foresight. Climate models, disaster response systems, global communication. We monitor the planet constantly. We track near-Earth objects. We simulate worst-case scenarios. According to mainstream thinking, this awareness sets us apart from ancient civilizations. They were vulnerable. We are prepared. But this belief depends on one assumption. That complexity equals resilience. History suggests the opposite. The more complex a system becomes, the more fragile it is. Interdependent, sensitive to disruption. Ancient civilizations collapsed when food systems failed or climate shifted. Modern civilization depends on electricity, satellites, logistics, and global coordination. Remove one pillar, and the rest may follow. The question is not whether modern civilization is advanced. The question is whether it is survivable. Evidence point 1: the illusion of permanence. Every civilization believes it will last. This belief is not arrogance, it is psychological necessity. Societies require faith in continuity to function. Planning, investment, culture. Ancient empires engrave their permanence in stone. Modern civilization engraves it in data. But permanence has always been an illusion. Ruins remind us that belief does not equal reality, and that progress does not guarantee survival. What's even more unsettling is that ancient civilizations often collapsed at their peak, not during decline. They were confident, organized, advanced, just like us. Evidence point 2: repeating patterns of collapse. When historians study fallen civilizations, patterns emerge. Environmental stress, resource overuse, social fragmentation. But these are not causes. They are vulnerabilities. The true triggers are often external. Droughts, floods, earthquakes, cosmic events. Civilizations don't fail because they are weak. They fail because the world changes faster than they can adapt. Ancient knowledge systems were built around this reality. Modern systems often deny it. We plan for growth, rarely for reset, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Are we repeating the same mistakes, just with better technology? Evidence point 3: what happens to knowledge after collapse? One of the greatest losses in any collapse is not population. It is memory. Libraries burn. Languages die. Technical knowledge becomes useless without infrastructure. After collapse, survivors prioritize food, shelter, and safety. Advanced knowledge fades rapidly. This is how civilizations forget who they were. Ancient builders understood this. That is why they preserved knowledge in durable forms. Stone, myth, ritual. Modern civilization preserves knowledge in fragile ones. Digital files, cloud servers, complex networks. If collapse occurred tomorrow, how much of our knowledge would survive a century? A millennium? This is not pessimism. It is historical precedent. Evidence point 4. The choice ancient civilizations made. Ancient societies appear to have accepted collapse as inevitable. They did not attempt to prevent it at all costs. Instead, they focused on continuity, preserving calendars, preserving stories, preserving lessons. They built monuments not to glorify themselves, but to speak to the future. Their question was not, how do we survive forever? It was, how do we help the next civilization recover? That is a radically different mindset. One rooted not in dominance, but in humility. And it forces us to confront our own assumptions. Evidence point 5, the final parallel. Perhaps the most haunting parallel between ancient civilizations and our own is this. They reached a point where the past felt irrelevant, where progress felt unstoppable, where catastrophe seemed like a relic of myth. And that was precisely when memory mattered most. If we are part of a cycle, then the present moment is not unique. It is familiar. We stand where others once stood, surrounded by knowledge, blind to vulnerability, unless we choose differently. When we step back and view the full arc of this investigation, a sobering conclusion emerges. Lost civilizations were not failures. They were predecessors. They lived. They learned. They collapsed. And they tried to leave something behind. Some alternative historians believe humanity has been here before, at the edge of forgetting. Mainstream scholars argue this interpretation is too bleak, too speculative. But the evidence points to one undeniable truth. Civilization is fragile. Memory is everything. And the choice facing humanity is not whether collapse will ever happen, but whether we will remember when it does. In this chapter, the mystery stopped being ancient. It became personal. Lost civilizations are not just stories from the past. They are mirrors. They show us what happens when knowledge is lost, when warnings are ignored, when progress is mistaken for permanence. The ruins we study today were once thriving worlds, just like ours. The question is not whether civilization can fall. It always has. The question is what we choose to preserve. Because someday, someone may stand among the ruins of our world and wonder what we knew and whether we tried to warn them. The hidden thread that connects everything. If lost civilizations are not anomalies, but predecessors, then there must be something connecting them all. A common thread running beneath geography, culture, and time. Something subtle, something easily overlooked. Because civilizations don't vanish randomly, and knowledge doesn't survive accidentally. When we step back from individual mysteries and examine the full pattern, a deeper structure begins to emerge. Mainstream archaeology treats ancient mysteries as isolated problems. A submerged site here, an anomalous monument there, a myth explained away as symbolism. Each puzzle is studied independently, categorized, contained. This approach has produced valuable insights, but it has also fragmented the story. By separating architecture from astronomy, myth from geology, culture from catastrophe, according to conventional wisdom, there is no unifying narrative. Only coincidence, only gradual progress, interrupted by occasional collapse. But when multiple disciplines point toward the same conclusion, coincidence becomes unlikely. And what we see emerging now is not chaos, but coherence. Evidence point 1: civilization as a knowledge chain. When civilizations collapse, they don't disappear completely. They fracture. Fragments survive in architecture, in stories, in rituals, in symbols. These fragments are then inherited by later cultures, often without full understanding. This explains why later civilizations build atop older foundations, why myths reference forgotten ages, why knowledge appears suddenly, then fades. It also explains why progress seems uneven. Civilization may not be invented repeatedly. It may be rediscovered, each cycle inheriting less than the one before, until knowledge is rebuilt or lost again. Evidence point 2: why the oldest evidence is the strongest. One of the most counterintuitive findings in archaeology is that the oldest structures are often the most durable, the most precise, the most mysterious. Later constructions are simpler, cruder, less resilient. This inversion challenges the idea of linear progress. But it makes sense if early monuments were built with survival in mind. They were not designed for comfort. They were designed to endure catastrophe. Later societies, living in relative stability, prioritized convenience over permanence. They built for life, not for collapse, which is why the deepest messages are carved into the oldest stone. Evidence point 3: the global consistency problem. One of the strongest arguments against coincidence is repetition. The same themes appear everywhere: a flood, fire, cycles, teachers, lost ages, different languages, different symbols, same story. Mainstream explanations rely on universal psychology. But psychology alone does not explain technical precision, astronomical accuracy, architectural consistency. These require shared knowledge or shared experience. And shared experience on a global scale points toward catastrophe, not imagination. Evidence point 4: the silence of the record. Perhaps the most revealing evidence is what's missing. We should expect to find gradual development, clear transitions, experimentation phases. Instead, we find gaps, long silences, abrupt beginnings, sudden endings. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to incomplete data. But incompleteness itself becomes evidence when it is consistent. It suggests erasure, not just of structures, but of context. which is exactly what large-scale catastrophe would do. Evidence point 5. Why this idea is resisted. Ideas about lost civilizations face intense resistance, not because they are dangerous, but because they are destabilizing. They challenge academic frameworks, national narratives, human exceptionalism. They suggest we are not at the peak of history, but somewhere in the middle. Mainstream scholars often fear that opening this door invites speculation, but refusing to open it invites blindness. And history shows that blindness is far more dangerous. When we connect the dots, a sobering synthesis appears. Civilization is not a straight ascent. It is a relay. Knowledge is passed forward, sometimes deliberately, sometimes accidentally, sometimes intact, sometimes broken. Lost civilizations may not be lost because they failed. They may be lost because the world changed faster than memory could adapt. And yet, they tried. They left clues, markers, warnings, not to dominate the future, but to help it remember. In this chapter, the mystery came into focus. Submerged worlds, stone giants, sky knowledge, sealed chambers, survivors, cycles. They are not separate mysteries. They are chapters of the same story. A story humanity keeps forgetting. Lost civilizations may not be warnings of what we should fear. They may be lessons about what we should preserve. Because when everything else is stripped away, memory is all that remains. And as we approach the end of this investigation, one final question remains unanswered. If the past tried to speak to us, are we finally listening? In the final chapter, we'll leave certainty behind and confront the mystery that refuses to resolve. The question that history never answered. At the end of every investigation, there comes a moment when the evidence stops. But the implications do not. Because when we look at the ruins, the myths, the cycles, and the silences together, one truth becomes unavoidable. History is not finished speaking. We are simply standing inside the pause between chapters. Mainstream history thrives on certainty. Dates, timelines, proven sequences of cause and effect. And to be clear, certainty matters. Without it, history collapses into speculation. But there is another truth historians quietly acknowledge. The deeper we look into the past, the less complete the picture becomes. Evidence degrades. Contexts vanish. Whole worlds slip beyond recovery. At a certain depth, certainty gives way to probability. And probability gives way to questions. This is not failure. It is the natural limit of knowledge. Lost civilizations sit precisely at that boundary. Not fully provable. Not fully dismissible. Suspended between what we can show and what we can no longer access. Evidence point 1. What we know for sure. We know civilizations have collapsed. Repeatedly. We know environmental catastrophe can erase societies rapidly. If floods, climate shifts, volcanic winters, cosmic impacts. We know ancient people observed the sky with extraordinary care. They tracked cycles longer than lifetimes. They encoded time into stone. We know knowledge has been lost before. Libraries burned. Languages vanished. Technologies forgotten. These facts are not controversial. They are established, and they form the foundation beneath every unanswered question. Evidence point to what we cannot prove yet cannot ignore. We cannot definitively prove that advanced global civilizations existed before recorded history. There are no intact cities, no unbroken written records, but we also cannot ignore the anomalies, the submerged landscapes, the sudden leaps of knowledge, the oldest structures being the most precise, the universal memory of catastrophe. Science advances by confronting anomalies, not dismissing them. Every major paradigm shift began as an uncomfortable question. The idea that Earth was not the center of the universe, that continents move, that extinction reshapes life. Each was once unthinkable, until it was. Evidence point 3, the danger of false certainty. There is a greater danger than speculation. It is the belief that everything important is already known. History shows that civilizations often collapse not because they lack intelligence, but because they mistake stability for permanence. They assume the future will resemble the present. They trust systems that have never been tested by true catastrophe. Ancient societies that survived longest were not the most powerful. They were the most adaptable. And adaptation begins with humility. The humility to admit that the past may be deeper than our models allow. Evidence point 4, why the mystery persists. Lost civilizations endure as a mystery because they sit at the intersection of disciplines. Archaeology alone cannot solve them. Neither can geology, nor astronomy, nor mythology. Only when these fields speak together does the pattern emerge. And patterns are not proof, but they are not accidents either. The persistence of the same questions across centuries suggests something unresolved. Not a single secret, but a missing framework. A way of understanding human history not as a ladder, but as a landscape shaped by cycles, erasure, and renewal. Evidence point 5, the one thing every civilization leaves behind. Every civilization leaves ruins, but only a few leave warnings. Warnings are not instructions. They are reminders. Reminders that knowledge is fragile. That memory must be protected. That collapse is not the end, but forgetting is. Whether ancient civilizations intended to warn us specifically is impossible to prove. But they clearly tried to speak beyond their own time. And that alone is extraordinary. When all evidence is weighed honestly, one conclusion stands above the rest. We do not know nearly as much about our past as we believe. And that uncertainty should not frighten us. It should ground us, because certainty breeds complacency. Uncertainty breeds vigilance. Some researchers believe lost civilizations are the key to understanding humanity's true story. Others believe they are illusions born of pattern-seeking minds. Both positions share one thing. They acknowledge that the past still holds power over the future, and that power has not been fully reckoned with. So where does this leave us? Not with answers, but with responsibility. Responsibility to question inherited narratives. Responsibility to preserve knowledge. Responsibility to recognize that progress is not guaranteed. Lost ancient civilizations may never be fully recovered. Their cities may remain underwater. Their libraries turn to dust. But their message, intentional or not, still echoes. Civilization is fragile. Memory is everything. And forgetting is the true collapse. The ruins beneath our feet were once someone's present, just as our world is someone else's past in waiting. The final question is not whether lost civilizations existed. The final question is this: when our time becomes a mystery, what will we leave behind? The evidence we haven't found yet. Every investigation ends the same way. Not with answers, but with a realization that what we've uncovered is only what survived. Because history is not written by what happened. It is written by what remains. And when we ask what happened to lost ancient civilizations, the most important evidence may not be what we've already found, but what we haven't. Mainstream archaeology is built on surviving material. Stone tools, foundations, artifacts preserved by chance. This creates a powerful bias. Civilizations that built in stone appear advanced. Civilizations that built in wood, earth, or organic materials appear primitive or invisible. But technological sophistication does not always favor permanence. It favors efficiency. A civilization optimized for survival may leave fewer traces than one obsessed with monumentality. This creates a paradox. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the less likely its everyday infrastructure is to survive catastrophe. Metal corrodes. Electronics vanish. Organic materials decay. Stone remains, which means our picture of the past is skewed toward what was designed to last, not what was designed to work. And that raises a deeply uncomfortable possibility. What if the civilizations we call lost were not stone-bound societies at all? What if they were simply invisible to archaeology? Evidence point 1: the missing urban footprint. When archaeologists search for ancient cities, they look for familiar patterns. Walls, foundations, streets. But cities do not have to look like stone grids. Advanced societies could have used materials that leave little trace. Compressed earth, wood composites, Organic architecture. In tropical regions especially, entire cities could vanish in centuries. Satellite imagery has already revealed massive settlement patterns beneath jungles, places once assumed to be empty wilderness. This forces a reevaluation. How many civilizations have we missed simply because we were looking for the wrong kind of city? And how many were erased by environments hostile to preservation? Evidence point 2. Technology that leaves no ruins. Modern technology leaves surprisingly little behind. Remove electricity, and most of our world becomes inert. Plastic degrades, steel rusts, concrete fractures. In 10,000 years, little would remain of modern civilization beyond scattered anomalies. Now imagine an ancient civilization that used advanced but biodegradable technology, or one that relied on biological systems instead of mechanical ones. Such a civilization could flourish and vanish without leaving obvious ruins. The absence of evidence would not mean absence of existence. It would mean absence of durability. And archaeology, by its nature, favors durability over truth. Evidence point 3. Why stone monuments are outliers. If most ancient civilizations were optimized for living, not lasting, then stone monuments may not represent typical society. They may represent exceptions, emergency projects, preservation efforts, knowledge vaults, built not because stone was common, but because it survived. This reframes monumental architecture entirely. These structures may not reflect everyday life. They may reflect crisis. A civilization anticipating collapse would not preserve houses. It would preserve information. Stone monuments may be lifeboats, not cities. And that explains their scarcity, precision, and obsession with time. Evidence point 4. The ocean floor as the final archive. If early civilizations favored coastlines, then the greatest archive of human history lies underwater. Continental shelves that were once habitable are now submerged. Exploration is limited. Preservation is uneven. Underwater archaeology is still in its infancy. We have mapped more of Mars than Earth's ocean floor. This means the absence of evidence is not just a gap. It is a frontier. And frontiers have a habit of rewriting history. What we call prehistory may simply be unexcavated history. Evidence point 5. The discovery that changes everything. Every scientific field has its turning point. The moment when an assumption collapses. In archaeology, that moment often comes quietly. A site redated. A structure reinterpreted. A pattern noticed too late. What makes lost civilizations controversial is not lack of data. It is that the data does not fit the model. But models are not reality. They are tools. And tools must change when reality demands it. The next discovery: a submerged city, a misdated structure, a decoded monument, may not add a footnote, It may force a rewrite. When we accept that history is filtered through survival bias, a sobering realization emerges. We are not studying ancient humanity. We are studying what catastrophe failed to erase. Entire worlds may have existed beyond our current imagination. Not superior, not inferior, just different. And their absence from history books does not make them irrelevant. It makes them fragile, which may be the most important lesson of all. In this chapter, the mystery shifted again, not toward answers, but toward humility. Lost civilizations may not be missing because they never existed. They may be missing because they were never meant to last. Stone survives. Life does not. And when we judge the past by what remains, we risk mistaking durability for importance. The real story of humanity may not be written in ruins, but in gaps. Gaps we are only beginning to recognize. And as we move forward, one final idea begins to surface. What if the greatest lost civilization is not behind us, but ahead of us, waiting to be forgotten? When forgetting becomes inevitable, every civilization believes it will be remembered, not out of arrogance, but out of instinct. Because to build is to assume continuity, and to record is to assume someone will be there to read. But history suggests a far darker possibility. That forgetting is not a failure of civilization. It may be its final, unavoidable stage. Modern culture treats forgetting as a problem to be solved. We digitize archives, back up data, store information redundantly across continents. According to mainstream thinking, knowledge loss is a technical issue, a matter of storage and preservation. If we save enough data in enough places for long enough, the future will remember us. But this assumption rests on a fragile belief that future societies will be able to interpret what we leave behind. History suggests otherwise, because forgetting does not begin with destruction. It begins with disconnection. Evidence point 1. When meaning dies before material. Archaeologists often find objects whose purpose is unknown. Tools without context. Symbols without language. The material survives. The meaning does not. This is the most common form of forgetting. Civilizations rarely vanish overnight. They fade. Languages evolve. Rituals lose relevance. Knowledge becomes superstition. Within a few generations, even sophisticated systems can become incomprehensible. If this can happen to small cultures over centuries, what happens to global civilizations over millennia? Preservation does not guarantee understanding. And without understanding, memory is functionally lost. Evidence point 2. The collapse of interpretation. Every record requires a key. Language, cultural reference, context. Remove the key, and information becomes noise. Ancient inscriptions survived, but their meanings were lost for thousands of years. Calendars remained, but their cycles were misunderstood. Monuments endured, but their purpose faded into myth. Now consider our own time. Digital formats change rapidly. Software becomes obsolete. Hardware decays. A hard drive discovered in 10,000 years would be indistinguishable from stone, without the infrastructure to read it. Our era may be leaving behind more data than any civilization in history. But without continuity, that data becomes silence. Evidence point 3. Why ancient civilizations chose simplicity. Ancient builders often encoded knowledge in simple, durable forms. Stone alignments, stories, ritual repetition, not because they lacked sophistication, but because simplicity survives disruption. A story can be retold even when writing is lost. An alignment can be rediscovered even when astronomy is forgotten. This was not ignorance. It was strategy. Ancient civilizations may have understood something we are only beginning to grasp. That complexity accelerates forgetting. The more a system depends on specialization, the faster it collapses when continuity breaks. Evidence point 4. The myth of permanent records. Modern society believes it has solved the problem of memory. Cloud storage, global archives, artificial intelligence. But all of these systems depend on uninterrupted power, stable governance, and technical literacy. Remove any one of these, and the system fails. Ancient stone monuments require none of them. They stand in silence, waiting for rediscovery. This may explain why ancient civilizations invested enormous effort in seemingly impractical constructions. They were not preserving information for their contemporaries. They were preserving it for strangers, people who would not share their language, culture, or worldview. People like us. Evidence point 5. Forgetting as a feature, not a bug. Here is the most disturbing possibility. Forgetting may not be accidental. It may be structural. Civilizations grow by simplifying their narratives. They compress history. They discard complexity. This makes societies efficient, but brittle. The more streamlined a culture becomes, the less redundancy it retains. When collapse occurs, there is nothing to fall back on. Ancient societies that survived longest were often those that accepted loss as inevitable. They planned not to avoid forgetting, but to recover from it, which reframes lost civilizations entirely. They may not have failed to preserve memory. They may have preserved exactly as much as was possible. When we confront the limits of preservation, a sobering realization emerges. No civilization can guarantee remembrance. No archive is permanent. No record is immune to time. Some alternative historians suggest ancient builders understood this deeply. They did not try to save everything. They chose what mattered most. Cycles, warnings, foundations. Mainstream scholars remain cautious. They argue this interpretation attributes modern awareness to ancient minds. But the pattern remains. Again and again, civilizations leave behind simple messages embedded in durable forms. Not details, not instructions, reminders. In this chapter, we reach the edge of certainty again. Not about what ancient civilizations knew, but about what they accepted. That forgetting is inevitable. That collapse is survivable. That memory must be rebuilt, not preserved intact. Lost civilizations may not be mysteries because they failed. They may be mysteries because they understood something fundamental. That no matter how advanced a society becomes, time will strip it down to fragments. The only question is which fragments remain. And as we move toward the final stages of this investigation, one last tension remains unresolved. If forgetting cannot be prevented, then what is the purpose of remembering at all? Why we keep trying to be remembered? If forgetting is inevitable, then one question remains more haunting than all the others. Why do civilizations keep trying to defy it? Why carve stone when time erodes everything? Why tell stories when language dies? Why build monuments when collapse is certain? The answer may reveal more about humanity than any lost city ever could. According to mainstream psychology, the human desire to be remembered is rooted in mortality. Civilizations, like individuals, seek continuity beyond their lifespan. Monuments are expressions of power. Records are expressions of control. Legacy is a defense against impermanence. In this view, remembrance is ego at scale, a refusal to accept extinction. Historians often frame ancient monuments as political tools, statements of dominance, claims of permanence. And in many cases, that is true. But this explanation does not go far enough, because it fails to explain why civilizations facing collapse still invest energy in remembrance, when survival itself is uncertain, which suggests the motive may not be vanity. It may be responsibility. Evidence point 1. Memory as a survival strategy. Across human history, memory has served a practical function. It teaches where danger lies. It encodes hard-earned lessons. Oral traditions warn of floods. Rituals mark seasonal threats. Stories preserve boundaries not to cross. These are not attempts at immortality. They are tools for survival. When civilizations faced repeated catastrophe, memory became their most valuable asset. Not to preserve identity, but to preserve behavior. This reframes ancient monuments and myths. They may not be about being remembered. They may be about being understood. Evidence point 2. The difference between legacy and warning. Legacy celebrates achievement. Warnings acknowledge vulnerability. Ancient civilizations appear far more concerned with the latter. Their myths emphasize destruction over triumph. Their monuments track cycles, not conquests. Their calendars reset after catastrophe. This is not how a civilization obsessed with glory behaves. It is how a civilization marked by trauma behaves. Survivors do not build to boast. They build to caution. And caution implies concern for those who come after. Evidence point 3. Teaching without authority. One of the most curious features of ancient remembrance is how indirect it is. Warnings are not explicit. Lessons are encoded, not declared. Why not leave clear instructions? Because authority does not survive collapse. Any message tied to power structures risks rejection by future societies. Symbolism endures because it invites interpretation rather than obedience. Ancient builders may have understood that the future would not trust the past. So they left clues instead of commands. Not to control the future, but to start conversations. Evidence point 4. Remembering as an ethical act. At its deepest level, remembrance may not be about survival at all. It may be about obligation. To know something dangerous and say nothing is unethical. If ancient civilizations understood that catastrophe was cyclical, then remaining silent would be a betrayal of future generations. They could not stop the cycle, but they could speak across it. In this light, monuments and myths become acts of moral responsibility. Not ego, not fear, care. Evidence point 5. The quiet continuity of the human story. Despite collapse, humanity persists. Knowledge fragments survive. Cultures rebuild. Stories resurface. This continuity suggests that remembrance works, even imperfectly. We are known to ourselves only because others tried to remember before us. And we will be known only if we try in return. This is not defiance of impermanence. It is acceptance with purpose. When we view lost civilizations through this lens, their actions take on new meaning. They were not trying to be immortal. They were trying to be helpful. Some alternative historians argue that this impulse defines humanity itself. That progress is not measured by what we build, but by what we choose to pass on. Mainstream scholars rarely frame ancient remembrance this way, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. Civilizations keep trying to be remembered, not because they believe they will succeed, but because choosing not to try would be worse. In this chapter, we arrived at a quiet realization. The ruins are not cries for recognition. They are gestures of care. Lost civilizations may not be asking us to admire them. They may be asking us to listen. Listen to the warnings embedded in stone. Listen to the cycles encoded in myth. Listen to the silence between what is known and what is forgotten. Because remembrance is not about defeating time. It is about giving the future a chance. And that leaves us with one final question. The question that every civilization must eventually face. When it is our turn to be remembered, what will we choose to pass on? The one mystery that never Chinese letter typo avoided. Every civilization leaves behind questions, but only a few leave behind doubts. Doubts about where we came from. Doubts about how much has been forgotten. Doubts about whether history is telling us the truth or only what survived. And when all evidence is laid out, one mystery remains untouched. Not because it cannot be solved, but because it refuses to be. Throughout this investigation, we followed a trail left behind by lost civilizations, submerged landscapes, stone giants, sky knowledge, sealed chambers, survivors, cycles, warnings. Each piece raised questions. Together, they formed a pattern. But patterns do not explain intent. And intent is the one thing history rarely preserves. We can measure stones, date floods, track stars, analyze myths, but we cannot fully know why ancient people chose to remember the way they did. And that uncertainty is not a flaw. It may be the point. Evidence point 1. The mystery is not what was lost. It's tempting to believe the great mystery is what ancient civilizations knew. Their technology, their science, their achievements. But knowledge is always contextual. It belongs to its time. What truly endures across civilizations is not information, but behavior. The way societies respond to danger. The way they frame collapse. The way they think about time. And across all lost civilizations, one behavior repeats. They remember forward. They do not simply preserve the past. They aim their memory at the future. That choice is deliberate and deeply human. Evidence point 2. Why no civilization leaves clear answers. If ancient civilizations wanted to be understood, they could have left clearer messages. Explicit warnings, instructions, manuals. But they didn't. Instead, they left ambiguity. Symbols, alignments, stories open to interpretation. This is often cited as evidence of primitiveness. But ambiguity may be intentional. Clear answers demand obedience. Ambiguous ones demand thought. Ancient builders may not have trusted the future to follow instructions, but they trusted it to ask questions. That trust may be their most radical legacy. Evidence point 3. The pattern of reinterpretation. Every generation reinterprets the past. Ruins become temples. Temples become myths. Myths become metaphors. This is not distortion. It is translation. Lost civilizations understood this. They knew their messages would be misunderstood, reframed, repurposed, and yet they left them anyway. Which means accuracy was not the goal. Continuity was. They were not trying to control how they were remembered. They were trying to ensure they were remembered at all. Evidence point 4. Why the cycle persists. Civilizations keep rising and falling not because humanity fails to learn, but because the conditions of learning keep changing. What works in one era becomes dangerous in another. What ensures survival at one scale becomes fragile at the next. Ancient societies adapted to their world. Modern society adapts to ours. Neither is superior. Both are temporary. The cycle does not persist because we forget the past. It persists because the future is never identical to what came before, which means no lesson is ever complete, only revisited. Evidence point 5, the silence that cannot be filled. After all the evidence, all the theories, all the speculation, there remains a silence, a space history cannot fill. Not because evidence is missing, but because meaning cannot be fixed. Every answer we give today will be questioned tomorrow. Every conclusion will eventually feel incomplete. Lost civilizations understood this. They did not try to finish the story. They left it open. And that brings us to the final realization. The greatest mystery is not Atlantis, not submerged cities, not ancient technology. The greatest mystery is this: every civilization knows it will be misunderstood. Every civilization knows it will be simplified. Every civilization knows it will be forgotten, at least in part. And yet, they speak anyway. They build anyway. They warn anyway. They remember anyway. Not because they believe they will be understood, but because remaining silent would mean giving up on the future. So what is the real legacy of lost ancient civilizations? Not knowledge, not power, not monuments. It is the act of reaching forward across time. A decision repeated again and again across history. To leave something behind, even knowing it will be misread. Even knowing it may be ignored, even knowing it may fail. That act binds every civilization together. Past, present, future. We are not separate from lost civilizations. We are them, standing at a different point in the cycle. And someday, we will leave behind fragments of ourselves, ruins, stories, data, a silence. And someone will stand among those fragments and ask the same question we asked at the beginning. What actually happened to the lost civilizations? The answer will not be found in stone or myth. It will be found in how much we chose to remember and how much we chose to pass on.